Hey guys, I'm gonna tell you which are the most aggressive chess openings. If you are an attack aggressive player, if you like dynamic, unclear, sharp or tactic middle games, then stay there and take a look at the next 10 most aggressive chess openings. The first opening we are going to mention is a Smith-Morra Gambit. This is a line we play after King's Pawn, Black plays Sicilian, which is probably the most common reply for Black. Then we will play d4, and when they capture here, we won't recapture. Instead, we will play c3. This is a Smith-Morra Gambit. The idea in Smith-Morra is that once he recaptures, we will develop one piece. Of course, we will have a pawn down, but in the next moves we will have a very easy development. We will develop the bishop over c4, the knight over the3, we will castle very soon, and our bishop will be developed somewhere over here. And in this position we will have a lot of activity, a lot of pressure. There are some tricks over there, some opening traps, and I can tell you it's a really interesting and dynamic with good compensation middle game. The aggressive line number 2 is Albin Countergambit, and we can play it against Queen's Pawn. So after d4 we play d5, and when white plays Queen's Gambit, then we play e5. This is Albin Countergambit. The idea here is that after white captures the pawn on e5, we will play d4, getting a lot of space. And we have a pawn down, but there are some good things here. One of them is that the pawn is really weak here, and we can attack it very easily with knight c6 and probably knight e7, knight g6. But not only that, also the position is a little hard because they don't have an easy development. The pawn is getting a lot of space over here, and it's not easy for white to develop pieces in that position. And finally there are some checks here over b4. The king is a little exposed over there, and this is going to make it also harder for white to play a dynamic game in the next moves. The next aggressive line is Scandinavian Attack, and we can play it when we play King's Pawn, Black plays Sicilian Defense. Also, I would like to add that we can also play Scandinavian Attack after French or Caro-Kann. So this line is actually very useful, and it can be really helpful against all those defenses. So Black plays Sicilian, and then we develop the knight. I'm just going to play some moves so you can get the idea. And after knight c6 we develop the bishop over the fianchetto, and then we castle. And then the knight is going to be developed over d2. Black can play something like d5, but this is not going to be a problem. Our pawn should go to e5. This is one of the keys in King's Indian Attack. This pawn is going to be really important because it's going to give us a lot of space in the center, and it's going to create some problems for Black. For example, the knight, the good defender of the castling, won't be there anymore. And for example, knight d7, rook e1 is another important move here, and the bishop goes to f4, and for example a6, we can play here knight d2, and when the queen goes to c7, we can play knight f1. The typical plan here is to play h4, and very often the knight goes over h2 to g4, and then the other knight goes to g5, and then the pawn goes to h6. We create weaknesses over there. If we can create weakness in dark squares, we can try to trade the dark squares bishop so we can attack over those squares. The idea is that we have a very clear way to attack on the king side. If Black doesn't know the line, if Black doesn't react the right way, we could be winning very early in the game. Aggressive line number 4 is King's Gambit, and this happens after the moves e4, e5, and then f4. The idea is that white wants to deflect this pawn so they can control the center with 2 pawns, but also the pawn on f4 is going to be very weak. It should be more or less simple in some lines to get the pawn back. And also another idea is that this bishop could go to c4, as very often the f file is going to be half open. There could be a lot of pressure on f7. So this is very well. If Black doesn't take the pawn, we are fine, and if Black takes the pawn, that's the way to try to refute the gambit. Then we will play knight f3 first, and if your opponent knows the theory, they will try g5. But then there is this line I want to show you. This is really fun, and it's when we play bishop c4. They can play g4 here, then we castle, and then we lose the knight. But that's fine, because then we're going to capture that pawn with the queen. As you can see, this is a gambit here, but this is not a gambit. We are not giving a pawn in the gambit, we're giving a piece. That's what makes it special. So we have a piece down here, but when we analyze the position, look at this. All black pieces are in the initial position. They don't have development. There is a lot of pressure here on f7 because we have the bishop and also the queen and the rook. So this position is really interesting to play bullet, blitz, and among beginners, intermediate players, this is going to be a lot of fun, a lot of pressure for black. It's really hard to defend in those levels, so white can create many problems for black in this line. Then we have Latvian Gambit, and this happens after the moves e4, e5, knight f3, and then this move, f5. The idea is that we're attacking white's central pawn, but, well, of course, white can capture the pawn, that's not wrong, but that's what we want. We will have a lot of fun here. We can play, for example, e4 first, attacking the knight, forcing the knight to go to some exposed and unprotected square, and when the knight comes here, we can play knight f6, just controlling h5 very well, making sure the queen is not creating problems over there, and that's the idea. In the next moves we are playing d6, we are playing d5, probably we are getting the pawn back, and if black doesn't know the line, if black doesn't play accurately in the next moves, they could actually be in trouble. As you can see, this pawn here is giving black a lot of space, so the position is looking actually interesting for black. The aggressive line number 6 is the Scotch Gambit, and this appears on the board after the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then d4. After it takes d4, we want recapture, we just play here bishop c4. The idea here is that we choose development over material. In the next moves we have a very easy and fast development by castling bishop g5, but also we're creating some problems for black. For example, if the knight goes to f6, we are playing e5 sometimes. Also some ideas with knight g5 with a lot of pressure here on f7. So in general we can say that there is enough compensation for the pawn, and also sometimes we can just get the pawn back. So it's a line I really recommend. Variation number 7 on this list is Alekhine Defense, and this happens after the moves e4 and knight f6. The idea with Alekhine Defense is that we are inviting white pawns to advance. They will be getting tempos, they will be getting a lot of space and a lot of control in the center, and this seems to be very good for white. However, there is also a bad side, and it is that as all these pawns advance, they stop controlling the squares. So there will be some weaknesses on white's field, and probably black can take advantage of those weaknesses once we start the middle game and we break in some specific points in the center. So a typical way to continue in this line is like e5, we go to d5, they can play c4, but this is fine, we just go to b6, the knight is totally safe here, and once they play d4, we can already start breaking and trying to develop some pieces. This position is very playable, it's very interesting, very dynamic. Then we have Trompowsky Attack, and we can see this line on the board after the moves d4, knight f6, and bishop g5. Something good about this line is that there is not too much theory compared to our opponent variations. The idea with this bishop g5 is that we are trying to capture the knight on f6, creating some problems on the pawn structure, but also the knight is a good defender of the castling and is putting some pressure in the center. So it gets even more interesting. Sometimes black can try something like e6 to recapture with the queen, and then we can play e4, and then we have the center. We have a very easy and fast development, and we also have threats like e5. Aggressive opening number 9. This is Danish Gambit. e4, e5, d4, e takes d4, we want recapture here, we just play c3. After d takes c3, one more time we want capture, we just play bishop c4, c takes b2, bishop takes b2, and at this point, as you can see, we have like 2 pawns down, but there is a very good and very clear compensation. The 2 bishops are great, putting a lot of pressure on the king side. We are developing very easily with knight f3 and castling. We have a pawn in the center creating problems, for example, for the knight if it goes to f6. The pressure on f7 can also be really important, since the knight can go ahead and the queen can also go over b3. So in this position there is a clear compensation. It's very playable, there is a lot of fun. And finally, aggressive variation number 10. This is one of my favorite lines, and it is a Scandinavian defense. So it happens after e4, then d5. Here the best move for white is he takes d5, we will recapture with the queen, and after knight c3, the most normal move here, we can play either queen d6, queen d8, also queen a5. But the idea with Scandinavian is that we are opening the position a little, we are playing something not very theoretical, and it's going to be a dynamic mid game, very interesting. There's also an easy development for black pieces. So as I said, one of my favorite, really recommend it for aggressive and dynamic players. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. Check out this video over here, I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you, like, subscribe, see you on the next.